Obviously, earlier I asked if you wanted me to read a bio, and you said to do a introduction of how we met and what I know about you. So here we go. So I met Adam at a festival, I think about 4 years ago. It was a sober, completely sober, so no alcohol festival in the woods, and we had a great time. And then we've been friends ever since. And we're both very passionate about sustainability, and a lot of what Adam's work is about kind of engaging people in ideas around sustainability and encouraging companies and individuals to reconsider how they can be more sustainable in their life. So I thought it'd be really interesting to ask Adam in to speak for us, and also talking a lot about the activism work that he does with Extinction Rebellion. So we've obviously got a big arts program as part of what they do. So yeah, thank you so much for speaking with us, Adam, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I'm going to mute myself and we're good to go.
Great, wonderful. And can you see my screen as we? Great. Okay. So really delighted to be doing this, and yes, there was some. I remember there being some art at that festival as well, even some body painting. I seem to remember, which was quite fun. So it's kind of bringing it round back circle, and yeah, for me, I've been passionate about how do we create engagement around environmental issues for a long time, and so. And there's also going to be like a bonus section to this conversation today, because I'm actually going to also talk about how I created art for change in another area related to the pandemic. So that's the first sort of, I'm guessing, 2/3 of the talk will be around Extinction Rebellion and how that created change by using art as a core part of its strategy. And then the second part is going to be about something called the rumour mill, which I created and then released in the during the pandemic. So just to take you back a little bit of history, when I was doing my at 15, doing my craft and design, I designed a wind turbine. So you know, I was kind of ahead of the time of it, really. But what actually happened is that I could design things, but I couldn't engineer things because it never made it off the design page. So I've actually chosen to kind of go into the things that I really know about, which is more about people. So what we've got is, oops, wait a second, it's not moving my screen. Ah, there we go. So what I the reason why I was designing a wind turbine was because even back then I was very aware that we have a problem on planet Earth. We've got not just climate change, but then also we've got other multiple climate and ecological issues. So we've got, as you can see here on the left, in the 1950s, the planetary boundaries are the kind of small, kind of hexagonal shape that's in the centre. We'd not breached any of those boundaries. By 2020, just a mere 70 years later, we've gone hurtling past quite a few of them. So there is an emergency on planet Earth. And so I wanted to do something about that. And so what I've been doing, particularly for the last 15 years, is really communicating about how do we do something about climate change, ecological damage. And that's been very much, for me, focused on how do you work with the human brain, and how do you use psychology, how do you use our understanding of how humans actually work to try and create behaviour change. And it's been quite an interesting journey, because what I've now kind of come up with is an understanding of how do you actually make things happen. And so what I'm just going to show you is like a hierarchy of what this can be for any organisation. It could be for Extinction Rebellion, it could be for your company that you work for, or it could be for the university, or for you personally. People have a vision, which is the destination that you want to get to. You'll have a mission, which is how you're going to get there. Then there is a strategy, which is the how of the mission. It's how we're going to deliver the mission. And then the plan is the kind of like the detail of what you're going to do for the strategy, which is basically an aggregation of the tactics. And the reason why I say this is because all of these are stories. And what I position myself as now is as a strategic storyteller for sustainable solutions, working with scale-ups and startups. Helping them really understand how do you get that strategy right, because what a lot of organizations do is they actually basically get an aggregation of tactics, put a bit of a plan together and think that's going to work, and they might have a vision, they might even have a mission, but what really missing is the strategy. And what's in a good strategy is that you've got a goal, you understand your key audiences, where the lever points are, and how you get the right timing. And so that's the last piece of kind of theory on this bit. But I've established that because I'll probably be coming back a bit about how XR's strategy was so brilliant to have achieved what it achieved, especially in the April 2019 rebellion that happened. And so there's a famous old phrase from this gentleman Einstein, which is a sure sign of madness is repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Now, to a certain extent, that's what I have been doing, and also what I would suggest society has been doing around environmental action, because I've been looking at how environmental action hasn't been really happening to the scale that it needed to. For the last 30 years, we've known that there's massive problems environmentally, that the ice caps are melting, etc. And even though we've got that kind of existential threat, we haven't been actually changing the way we've done things. And so I did personally start to do something. I started off by focusing on how to engage environmentally employees in large organizations, and I thought that was going to be great. Lots of people said that I was going to go like ballistic and I'd like make loads of money out of it, but I didn't. And because actually there's lots of reasons why people don't change generally, and particularly lots of reasons why they don't change environmentally. And so after a while, I kind of beat my head against the wall on that environmental engagement for employees, and then changed again a bit, and then eventually I came up with what my day job is still, which is the strategic storytelling. But then what happened was I still realized things weren't changing, and then I found out about Extinction Rebellion, and you might be familiar with the logo there, and we can track back Extinction Rebellion's launch to what they called at that time, because I wasn't a rebel at that time, the Declaration of Rebellion, which happened on the 31st of October 2018. And it was signed by such great and good as Rowan Williams, who's the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, and about 100 other people. And I remember reading it in The Guardian and going, oh my God, this is amazing. This is absolutely what we need, because it's basically saying that we have gone too far, and the only alternative now is not playing by the rules, because the rules have been broken by the system, because we're going to have climate breakdown. So we need to break the societal rules. And actually at the Declaration of Rebellion, Greta Thunberg came along and spoke at that. And it was very beautiful timing that Greta Thunberg and the school strikers were also having a lot of success at the same time that Extinction Rebellion was happening. And so fast forward a few weeks, there was another Extinction Rebellion protest happening, and actually what happened is I joined that protest at Buckingham Palace Gate, when I thought this was quite a beautiful artistic sort of treatment of something, because it's basically, as you know, the suggestion here is that our future is dead if we don't do something about it. And what happened is about probably 2 minutes after this picture was taken, this coffin peeled away from the Buckingham Palace gates and started walking back towards Parliament Square. And that chap who's in that bottom left-hand corner, I joined the that parade back, and I kind of like sat in line with the coffin and just walking along with the coffin. And that chap that's on the bottom left-hand corner with the shot on his shoulder turned to me and said, "Excuse me, I'm a bit tired. Would you like to take my place?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay." And so literally, I was carrying our future on my shoulders as in at the first within 5 minutes of me joining an Extinction Rebellion march. So that kind of set into place my passion for Extinction Rebellion and creating what for me was this quite artistic object. And so, because for me it's all about what's represented here. It's about this is kind of my favourite kind of like icon for XR, which is this statement, rebel for life, and also this beautiful imagery that's kind of in the background of it. Because what's a key part of the strategy for XR is that it's both disruptive and creative. So it stops people, driving around by sitting in the road, but it also brings a lot of creativity to it, which we'll be exploring in the rest of the talk. And that's where, the sweet spot of when XR's at its best is when it combines those two. And so this is kind of like a nice summary of that, because XR actions are, at the absolute core, they have to be non-violent, but they are disobedient. There is people, not actually, I never personally got arrested, but there are people who have been fully disobedient and being willing to sacrifice themselves. Obviously, Extinction Rebellion rebels got arrested, some went to jail, but crucially, very importantly, it's all very loving. It was observed that it was the politest rebellion ever. You had grandmas giving out tea and cakes at the rebellion. And within that creative side of things, obviously there's lots of things that you can do. Even, making food and cake, that's a creative aspect. But there's certainly ceremonies and performances and putting banners out. Disruptive, well, you can go maybe a bit too far with disruptive. Some people decided at one point that they wanted to fly drones over Heathrow. Fortunately, they never did that under the banner of Extinction Rebellion. They were asked to leave if they wanted to do that. But then there's things like they're kind of gluing on and sit-ins and die-ins and locking on. And then for me, where there's a real sweet spot there is around, what's in the centre there. And we'll kind of go through and explore that. But what's really important to kind of emphasise here is that the creative stuff is what gets that kind of mass interest, because art has this ability to resonate in people's hearts and souls. Whereas obviously the arrestable is what gets people's attention, because there's lots of people that do art projects to try and get attention, and they get some attention. There's lots of people that have tried doing arrestable stuff, being disruptive, and it gets some attention. But one of the key aspects of what created the amazing cut through in April 2019 was that combination of those two, and we'll start exploring that more fully now. Because what it is it started with this concept, which is that we need to rebel because we have to stop harm happening. And then there was the 3 demands of Extinction Rebellion, and interestingly, the words there, which were demand 1, which is tell the truth, demand 2, which was act now, and demand 3, which was beyond politics. They were actually crafted not by the communications team, but they're actually crafted by the team behind the branding and the artistry of Extinction Rebellion. And so that even at that stage, those 7 words, tell the truth, act now, beyond politics, those were part of the artistry of XR. And so tell the truth was you've got to create a climate emergency. you might be aware of citizens' assemblies. I'm not going to go into the detail of those if you don't know. They're quite interesting. I'd say go and check them out. And then the idea is obviously through this you can create transformation to co-create our future. So what we've got here is that this was a key part of XR, which was the branding of it. So Extinction Rebellion created its own font, which was this fucked caps. And it was quite clear that it was like, this is what you need to use to make that work. And I very much was influenced that and inspired. Once I had taken the coffin off my shoulders and then started to get involved with Extinction Rebellion, one of the things that I did was actually got involved in redesigning the core Extinction Rebellion presentation, which was the introductory presentation. And so I got very familiar with the fucked caps because I was using that obviously fairly regularly. And then also one thing that within XR that was very clear on was the colour schemes. So it was the kind of like the core colour schemes were, the green and the black, but it was all about bright colours. And that was very important. The artistry, it kind of great. It was obviously we're dealing with a very dark subject, which is that the potential extinction of our civilization. And that's something that can happen in our lifetime, and that's dark, that's difficult. So, and it's not trying to demean that. It's about trying to play with that emotional engagement with it. So you've got your lemons, your pinks, your reds, your dark blues, all that sort of energy, which is, I think, really beautiful. And then that's been applied in posters such as this, where what's really interesting here is that what it's kind of curious. What's the narrative that it's saying here? What's going on here? It's not clear, but it says something. So it's very artistic. And I remember these posters going up around London, and just things such as this. It's just like it says something, but what's it saying? It's like, obviously that's a bird's head, but then is it ears? Is it a face? What is it? What's he trying to say? Now, one thing that was really great about XR was that there was a very clear decision at the start that if we were going to take this narrative of art and disruption, creativity and disruption, that it needed to be made so that it was democratized. So there was basically people were sent the designs of how to do the screen printing. So as you can see here in the bottom right corner, you've got people creating the imagery on t-shirts, etc., etc. And then there's some screen prints here. And for me, it's really interesting to contrast this with the kind of very capitalistic versions of things, such as, famously Damien Hirst's dot pictures, where, Damien Hirst didn't create basically any of them. He just got his minions who are being paid like low wages to just, do that for him. Whereas Extinction Rebellion, actually what was really interesting is that not only did Extinction Rebellion not ever produce any merchandise itself, which forced people to have to create that merchandise through the screen printing, which really engaged people. And then you could feel this real pride because that t-shirt that you've got, either somebody created it that you've met and they've given that to you, so it's really feels an engagement, or you've created it yourself, so you've got some really emotional attachment to that. And then also what's important to note is that the person who designed the extinction symbol, which is what we can see in the main picture, that is actually an anonymous artist. He's based in East London, and a bit like Banksy, nobody kind of knows who he is. And he created the extinction symbol about 4 years before Extinction Rebellion started. And then Extinction Rebellion, once it came up with its name, it went for that. But he made very clear, and it's still the same, that it's effectively banned commercial use of the extinction symbol, which we'll come back to actually, because it's quite interesting how that's been corrupted in itself. Because what happened is I've just checked online for Extinction Rebellion t-shirts, and yes, of course, you can buy Extinction Rebellion t-shirts online. Unfortunately, none of these are screen printed, and none of these are actually from Extinction Rebellion. This is just good old capitalism finding a way of exploiting this situation. because really what Extinction Rebellion did is it channeled kind of the punk attitude where you're creating these fabulous outfits that people have got here, but then you've got these screen printed pieces of fabric on each of these people. So it's really engaging them. And then, out at a thing, this was actually similar. I had one of these Rebel for Life on my shoulder, which I used to proudly wear when I was going out. That was my favourite screen print that I'd got. And then, of course, you'd go around London and you'd see these International Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion sort of posters being fly posted all around. And this is something that went around the world. It wasn't just restricted to London, it was around the country, it went global, especially after the first International Rebellion. It was that we had definitely, I think there was probably about 20 or 30 other cities which actually participated in the International Rebellion, and then it went even bigger in October 2019. So I think that the key kind of message from this was actually, realistically, there was some control within this, because basically there was a central group, and there was about 4 people who were those that designed the fonts, dictated the colours, came up with the imagery, said how you should use it. But then it was that, so that was quite controlled, and that was quite important because it was very clear on the branding. And I remember actually creating a poster for an event and then sending it through for design, and then actually one of those people kind of like sent a very kind of like frustrated email saying, no, you can't use it like that, and I had to go and change it. So they were very clear on how to use it, but also clearly it was democratized, because then once they'd given these guidance, it's like, it's up to you to make your posters, it's up to you to create your screen prints and t-shirts, etc. And then obviously with the internet, then it could go not just around London, the UK, it could go global. And so what happened then? Well, this is actually one of the first sort of big action that I got involved with, being involved with myself, which was something which was kind of a quite an artistic process itself. It was called Blood of Our Children, and behind these people that's Downing Street. So I was working actually as a police liaison, so I was collaborating with that gentleman who's the only one that's standing out in the middle of the picture in his high visibility coat, and I'm probably just standing off camera somewhere talking to another one of his colleagues probably, as we kind of basically got obviously fake blood, which was fully biodegradable and was quickly cleaned away, but it created a really visceral response. And in fact, actually, there was quite a lot of controversy before this particular event happened, because people were very concerned about how it might impact on children. As it turned out, actually, what was amazing was that all the speeches after the adults had done this, giving away the blood on the streets here, we had speeches from children, and the hairs on the back of my neck still stand up thinking about just the passionate and kind of like heartfelt and fear sort of statements of these children who some of them were quite young, they didn't speak for long, but there were some who were in their teens who spoke astonishingly lucidly. In fact, I felt almost sort of embarrassed by how good they were. And I've been a public speaking trainer in the past, and there was this one young gentleman who was just amazing. But for me, what framed this is that you had the children, but you had this artistic process, which is for me what this imagery here is. It's like performance art in its own sense. And so then the Blood of Our Children was in February, and it was kind of like a test event to build up to the International Rebellion, which started at 11 a.m. on the 15th of April. And actually, I'd chosen to be in Parliament Square as my base. As you might be aware, there was actually 4 main sites around London which Extinction Rebellion took over. And so what you've got is here is like Extinction Rebellion on Waterloo Bridge. And this was like the idea was that you were we were gonna block the bridges until basically the police took us away. So the idea was that some of these people, not all of them by any means, I'm sure, were willing to be arrested to slow this down, because what it did is that by combining this, as you can see, the colours, we've got the pinks, we've got the blues, we've got the oranges, we've got the greens, the clear sort of narrative, it got people's attention and it got people thinking. And what you had was like, this was actually the garden bridge. So it famously had like, they bought kind of like big pot plants and things like that, because Boris Johnson actually had this brilliant idea that he was going to create a garden bridge across the Thames, which they sunk about £30 million into the planning it, and then never actually built it. And then Extinction Rebellion came along, basically closed the bridge down and created its own garden bridge. We closed it to motor vehicle traffic, but pedestrians and cyclists could go across this bridge, such as the intention of the first garden bridge. But this is the kind of probably the kind of the biggest icon of that April Rebellion, which was the pink boat which was placed on Marble Arch. Sorry, not Marble Arch. Oxford Circus. And this was like the picture that went round the world, because it was like, one of the things was, it was what one of the bit when art is at its best for me is it can be unexpected, it can be confusing but illustrating, and it says so much without actually saying anything. So tell the truth is obviously the first demand. So it was like, this is the core of what we're trying to say, which is that there is a climate emergency. And so it's like there's a boat in the middle of London, but the kind of, the depth of the messages is maybe in 30 years' time, we don't know, maybe this boat will be actually floating through Oxford Circus. And it's just the boldness of that. And also the other part of the boldness, which was incredible, is that the police actually allowed us to park a damn boat in the middle of Oxford Circus, which was quite incredible. I don't know how they got away with that, but I'm very impressed with the rebels that managed to achieve that. And then this is, for me, an even more iconic image of like, when the police decided they want to get rid of it, what you had, you'll be able to see, just if you squint at the screen, there's some rebels which have locked themselves on to the base of the boat. And then what you've got like one circle of police which are surrounding the boat, and then another circle of police surrounding it. And this image went global and created this kind of emotional resonance. And it wasn't just about the static works, it was also about the properly performance art. So this is something which they were called, termed the Red Brigade. And it would be men and women who would, young and old, who would get dressed up, as you can see, all in red. And they would have and they were brilliant watching them. They would never break. They would always have these faces of sorrow on them. And first, this was actually done as like a piece of performance art, and they would kind of tour around London, and the photographers would follow them. But then if we fast forward actually to the October Rebellion, a friend of mine actually took over the kind of like guiding of them. So he wasn't dressed up; he was just like in normal gear. And he worked out that not only could they be something that creates emotional resonance, and they absolutely did. I remember cycling up to these guys, and what they used to do is just walk very slowly along. And then part of the reason why they did that was because it was very moving. Part of it was also a strategy, because if you stop, the police can arrest you. But however, if you're moving, even if it's very slowly, the police can't really arrest you if you're moving around town. So it was a way of, these guys became actually part of our tactics, because as you can see here, one of the things that people did, the Red Brigade did, is they went up to a line of police, and what would happen is sometimes the police will be looking to do this technique called kettling, which is when they kind of like surround a group of activists, protesters, rebels, and then keep them there. But then what would happen is actually the Red Rebels, the Red Brigade, would come up to the police and just stand there and look at them for 5 minutes not moving. And then they'd go away. But then 5 minutes later, they'd come back again and look at them again, slowly. And if you can imagine what it must be like for this policeman who's they've been reading the papers, they know that there's this thing called the climate emergency, they know what Extinction Rebellion is talking about. I actually, as police liaison, had long conversations with police, and they understood what was going on. And literally, in moments like this, sometimes the police would be crying. And that's the power of art. That's the emotional resonance that art can create. That these policemen that have they'll have seen lots of things, that they were weeping because of just people standing watching them. And then the other thing that was really interesting is also that the Red Brigade could kettle the police. So they could create this thing where they stopped the police moving by doing this. So it's they were a tool for us to use as a brilliant tactic. So what was interesting is that, as to kind of go back to that, is that all of this is like the strategy of creativity and then applying it with these amazing tactics that we're going through here. And so I understood this, and I was, as I said, I was at the I started off the April Rebellion as basically a humble police liaison officer working. Not officer. That's what the police do. I'm police liaison rebel, shall we say? So my job was to interact between the police and the rebels. But then, due to some kind of crazy serendipity, I ended up in some meetings at the headquarters, and then through some more crazy serendipity, one of the main sort of founders of XR was in a meeting, and he just turned to me and he just said, "Right, Adam, you've been sort of facilitating some stuff here. Thanks for that. I'm busy now. We need to work out what we're actually doing for next week, because just as an insight, Extinction Rebellion, the April Rebellion, went way beyond what we were expecting it to be. So we probably expected it to last 5 days to a week. And it actually ended up lasting 10 days. So we literally didn't have anything planned past the first 5 days. So he turned to me and said, "Can you create something?" So I was like, okay. And so what happened is I turned to one of my other rebel colleagues after the founder had left, and I said, "Well, I've got this idea. Why don't we do something in the financial district to kind of demonstrate the kind of how money is financing climate destruction?" And he was like, "Great, let's do it." And I was like, "Why don't we go to the stock exchange?" And he was like, "Great, let's do it." So then, but what I recognised was that what we needed to create this needs to be a performance art project. So what we did is I immediately, after coming out of that meeting, I went out and then got on the phone straight away to the Fashion Action team, who were a very creative bunch of people. I said, I got on the call to one of the main designers there. He'd been a fashion designer for decades, and he was a passionate rebel. And I said, "I need you to create something for this thing, because it needs to have this artistry, because I'd learned how important the artistry, the creativity was for the disruption." And he said, "Great." And then an hour later he came in and he'd already done those sketch designs that you see artists do. And it's literally just like what this was. It was amazing. He'd created it straight away. And then one of the things that we did, we bought them the suits, got the ties, got their spray, gold. We got their visors and then sprayed them. And then also one of the things is that we're like, well, we don't want the traditional banners, because that doesn't fit with the kind of the suits. And the idea was that these people were kind of behind the screens of the just like those people in the stock exchange behind their screens. And so what we did is we actually got them, as you can see around the necks of the two people, like digi-screens, which were reading out the message, "Tell the truth. It's an emergency," etc. And what happened, it was amazing. The media just read those, and then they reported that in the articles. And so we had this, and as you can see, we had the police join us, and basically that it kind of closed down the stock exchange temporarily. Although actually it didn't close it down that much, because this was more of it was a disruptive stunt, but it was more a stunt than disruptive, because actually we knew that it would cause too much controversy because of fire regulations. So they were letting in staff through the fire exits. But what that didn't stop the media covering it. And what was interesting, though, is just to give you a contrast, is at the top is the front door of the stock exchange, but at the bottom is the back door of the stock exchange, which is still a public entrance. And what we did is we knew that to create the interest, what would create the interest was what's at the top. But to keep the door closed, we still needed people blocking the doors, which is what you can see that these guys are doing. But the interesting thing is that if we'd have turned up with these people along the bottom, that are just sitting on the floor with those nice banners, but they just look like stereotypical rebels. It's for want of a better term, stereotypical kind of activists, like as Boris Johnson called as the Crusties. Is that would it have got the attention? I don't think it probably would, and it did get attention because the next day, Financial Times, we got onto the front page of the Financial Times, the Stock Exchange. Now, would they have put us at the top of the paper if it had been those kind of like scruffy rebels? I don't think so. So it captures attention, it emotionally generates people. And then, obviously, as well, other types of artists captured us. So this is Massive Attack. They did a free gig for us. They also did other big gigs where they donated the money from that. And then the kind of one of the highest kind of accolades you could get in the art world is Banksy. This was about 2 days after the April Rebellion. There was at Marble Arch, which was one of our other sites, the final big site. This image appeared, and this was verified as being a Banksy. From this moment, despair ends, and tactics begin. So there's been some brilliant tactics which we've gone through, which are also influenced by the art. And it was influential because, as we can see here from The Guardian, this was like from the 30th of April, Greenpeace had done a poll, and they found, and this was just after the end of the rebellion, so basically the rebellion finished on the Thursday, and then the following Tuesday they'd released this poll. 2/3 of people in Britain believe there's a climate emergency, and I know from polling data before that hadn't there was nowhere near that number, even just 3 weeks before. Even though Greta had done stuff, Extinction Rebellion had done stuff, it was about a third. And so there was a sudden launch of energy. And then as a great sort of policy sort of change is that the British Parliament declared a climate emergency, and so did many other councils. Now, that's the good news. The not so good news is that the second demand, which is Act Now, which is, change the way that we're living our lives, that's not really changed much. There's not been that much difference. So there's people been saying the right things, even Boris Johnson, but they've not been necessarily doing the right things. And so it's, people did go back out on the streets. This book was launched by Extinction Rebellion in June 2019, so after the April Rebellion, and it's a really good book. I can actually recommend it. It's really well written. And the interesting thing is you'll see here, the extinction symbol's not actually on this, and that's because this is obviously a commercial venture, so it's not allowed. But it's clearly kind of quite an artistically designed cover. And then as a kind of like, as probably the best example of how all this has worked out is that the V&A did an exhibition both at the main Victoria and Albert and also the children's. So it was exhibited at both collections, both the children's and the kind of the big one. And as you can see here, they created that. So you've got the block prints, you've got the Declaration of Rebellion, you've got some flags, etc. So that was a real testament to the power of the art that we created. And then the final slide here is actually you really know when your art has arrived, when you've created something, is when commerce co-ops it. So this is something actually, again, which is they shouldn't have really been doing, but this is outside a swanky Shoreditch hotel, and they'd created this art piece using the Extinction Rebellion, clearly inspired by Extinction Rebellion, to at the front of their posh hotel. So for me, it's amazing how Extinction Rebellion has used art to create marry with disruption to create that massive shift that we saw, particularly in April. And then it still continued after then, but it's a bit difficult. Once you've done it once, it's like you've got to create something very different. And unfortunately, the rebellion didn't manage to do that. And me personally, I'm no longer a rebel. I left Extinction Rebellion a few months ago, but I'm still unbelievably passionate about what it managed to achieve, and I'm still a very big supporter of those people who are continuing to rebel. So, okay, so that's, I think, the first part of this. So, what I've actually got a follow-up aspect to it. So, Susie, shall we pause for sort of questions and then come back to that, the kind of what I did with the rumour mill project after that? Do people want to ask questions now, or shall I go through to the rumour mill and we'll do all the questions again?
I think do questions at the end if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. So, can you screen share the that image, that document that I sent through to you?
Yeah. One sec. Oh, I don't want to share it. I want to present it. Yeah, this one.
Yeah, and if you go back up to the first slide.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So, actually, wait a second. I've actually gone to the wrong slides. For some reason, where are they? Oh, I've just realised I shared the wrong one with you. Wait a second. I'm just going to find out. Slight technical hitch here. Got slightly excited, and I might well just go for it on this one because I think it's fine to do that. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stick with what we've got here and then just talk through the slides that are missing. So one thing, there is actually a connection with this rumour mill project, that during the April rebellion, the one thing that we noticed was that there was a lot of great things happened, but one of the things that wasn't so great was actually that we had a lot of rumours and a lot of kind of Chinese whispers going on. So it'd be like you'd see this text message on like the WhatsApp kind of groups saying there's loads of cops turning up to Waterloo Bridge. We need rebels here now because they're going to take it back from us. And people would go, oh, no, 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 no. And then people go charging down to Waterloo Bridge to kind of like be reinforcements. And then somebody would turn around and go, wait a second, there's no police there. Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, it was just a shift change. They were just kind of like changing the kind of shifts. So sorry, we don't need you. And that kept on happening. I know time and time over again. And so and then that had two impacts. Number one, it had an impact on kind of resources, so people running around town unnecessarily, but they also had an impact on mental health because it's stressful when you see this message. It creates stress, thinking, oh no, we're going to lose the Waterloo Bridge, and I've been there today and I really care about it, and then you find out later, but not until you've woken up the next day, that actually it didn't happen. So what I did actually is in the October Rebellion, running up to that, I designed this campaign which was called "Are You Part of the Rumour Mill?", which shared like a story, and I'll read it out to you because you can't see it, but there was a text message which we sent out, which said to the kind of like broadcast message, and also went out on an email saying it's human nature to tell stories, but when these stories are based on inaccurate information, they can easily have damaging effects on the well-being of individuals and the rebellion as a whole. due to increased anxiety levels and poor decision making. Good decisions are made on good information. Keep calm and rebel. And then we had a link to the kind of fuller detail. And what was amazing was due to this one kind of engagement, which was like sending out that message I've just read out to you to the WhatsApp groups and Telegram and on an email newsletter as well. Just two interventions led to basically no rumours in the October Rebellion, even though the October Rebellion was more rebels. We were unfortunately more disorganised, and also the police were much more organised. And so you'd expect more rumours, but there was no rumours. So what it showed was that you can work with human behaviour if you know how to do that. And that's why, going back to my core passion, and why I kind of decided for a year to be a full-time rebel, because I saw that Extinction Rebellion was really working with the kind of human understanding of how to get people engaged, and the art was obviously a key part of that. And so then I recognised that, create this campaign for the rumour mill then. But what happened is at the start of the pandemic, started realizing that there was rumors going around about, famously, like there was one rumor that if you drank neat alcohol, it would kill off the COVID virus. Well, unfortunately, it didn't kill off the COVID virus, but it genuinely killed some people in Iran, apparently, when it was taken rather literally. But there was loads of other rumors, and as you might be aware, that there was like many conspiracy theories around. And so what I did is I worked with my local mutual aid group, it's like the community group, to do a creative brief, and then asked our local community to create things. Because with Extinction Rebellion, I knew that I didn't really need to create something visual, because we had a captive audience, we had people who cared about, people who would listen. And so we knew that if I just sent out this simple text message with the right words, that would be enough. And it worked. But I knew that wouldn't work, trying to influence people when we've got no authority over them. It was just like there was these big mutual aid chats. So we created this brief where basically the same sort of idea, that it's empowering good information sharing behaviour, because what we wanted people to do was stop sharing the messages. So if somebody in the rebellion saw that there was police turning up and then reported that on their chat, we wanted people to not share it, just as we didn't want people to kind of reshare these crazy stories about the virus. It's very understandable why people do that sort of sharing, because people want to make sense of the world, especially in the normal times, and particularly now. And they were kind of worried for their friends and family's health, so they're more likely to share stuff because they're trying to help them. But unfortunately, that led to the rumours. So the campaign narrative was like, humans like stories, but if they're true, it causes fear and confusion, and people are empowered to be part of the solution. So the idea was stop, think, don't share. And then what we recognised also, what it wasn't about blaming people. It wasn't about directing them to the right information. It wasn't trying to share all the reasons why rumours happen, because that's too complex. It wasn't trying to myth bust that no, alcohol doesn't kill. It's just try and stop the virus spreading, because the virus, the infodemic, was these unfounded rumours. And so this is now when we can go back to the image that is being shared. So this is what we show. So that sharing is caring unless it's a red herring. As I recognise, by focusing on trying to create some art, that would capture people's attention. And these were sent out through like our WhatsApp community. So if you go to the next one, Susie, you then had this one, which is very simple, but a very kind of like strong message. And I'll just pause and let you read that. And so, for me, I kind of love that, because the artistry is in recognizing the image and how powerful it was. It's like an older person. You can't quite tell. Is it a person of color? Is it a, it asks some questions. I really liked the fact that it was black and white. It created some real interest in there. And so then, if you go to the next, and this is my favorite treatment. So if you press the play.
Stop before you share. Take a moment to consider where you got your information. Don't you trust your first sensation? If we stop before we share, few rumors spreading in the air. Repeat this affirmation. I will check my information to help to stop a spiraling viral info war. Stop before you share.
So as you can see, real kind of, I love the artistry in that, the creating the animation, the words, the singing. And then if you go on to the next one, Susie. And this play for this. And for me, this one, even though it's not necessarily the most, it's like got the kind of like purest creativity. It really nailed the message in a format that was the same as what we were trying to communicate. That and I'm sure that rumor possibly did go around. That was a made-up rumor, but maybe it did. So if you go to the next one. And these are intentionally silent. So again, this was like bright, capturing it. If you go again. Me, I quite liked that GIF because that one was like the kind of quite the most artistic in a sense, and I kind of enjoyed the artistry of that one very much so. And then actually, because we don't need to kind of like, if you give me the image again, and I'll just go through the last ones, Susie. So I can. So how do I do the sharing now then?
Yes, that's
Oh, wait a second. Now I've got it now. Okay, so there we go. So this was the kind of final treatment that we had, which was the oops, sorry, hit the wrong button there. Okay, hopefully you can see that. So this is like something I really like this because this was very cute. It's like kind of like sort of thing you see on nice greetings cards, and this person kind of like so much beautiful work on it. Create this kind of like characters meet the mindful trio. Can we stop the rumor mills? And so you had as members of the mindful trio, you had Sir Think-a-Lot, who was smart and witty. He has a passion for information, from big books to late night posts. Thoughtful and caring, he considers everything he reads and makes sure to pause and think before he shares. And then you've got Zensi, who was all calm, but he liked his focuses on doing positive things in this uncertain world. And then finally, Ms. Fact Check. And it's okay for Miss Fact Check to go off and do that because she can go off and do that. But it's read from verified sources. And the final image that was posted out on our WhatsApp chat was this message here. It's human to share stories, but rumours cause fear and confusion. Together we can stop the rumour mills. Think, keep calm, and fact check. And so, and that was actually, it was really brilliant for me to kind of go through that process of working to create a brief and then seeing what came in. And some of the things that you saw were very cute, some of them much more artistic, and there was loads of others which we didn't release because they didn't quite get the brief. So that's kind of like the bonus section on the rumour mill that happened during the pandemic. Now, and just going forward, what am I doing? As I say, I finished with Extinction Rebellion, and I am still working doing with kind of the startup clients on the strategic storytelling, but I'm also setting up something called the Hive Mind Project, which is a hive of minds collaborating to enable the rapid deployment of climate and ecological solutions using psychology and behaviour change principles. And the idea is it's going back to that passion of mine about how do we get that understanding of the human brain. But this isn't necessarily about gluing on or using the Red Brigade. There's other things that we're doing. So if you've got any interest in kind of like collaborating over how do we use this sort of thing, but you don't necessarily want to be a rebel, then get in touch with me, because I'm looking to set that up as well. And that is the final slide. So I am now open for questions.
Well, thanks so much. I'm just going to change.
Now, can you hear me okay?
Got a question.
Okay, great, yeah.
It's something that I struggle with a lot in terms of my art practice, because it's not all sustainably focused, but there is a kind of increasing strand of my practice that is to do with sustainability and to do with engaging around ideas around climate change. And I always really struggle to not feel hypocritical or guilty when the production, I know the production of that work in itself is going to have an impact on the environment. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that as artists, like what I know it's like there's people like Olafur Eliasson who are he's really transparent about the carbon footprint that his artworks kind of rack up or whatever in terms of his work. But yeah, I don't know if you got any ideas for how to deal with the guilt.
I think the main thing is that there's that famous old phrase, you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette. And the thing is, it's on the scale of impact that your art is having in terms of, on the environment, because you're using, and obviously use a lot of plastics, and there'll be some heat involved in that, and then some things that are disposed, etc. And then the impact on the individuals that are engaging with it, and how much that's working with them. So, Extinction Rebellion definitively had a carbon footprint. Even those red dresses that people were wearing, the Red Brigade, that there was an environmental impact to those guys. Some of those guys will have driven from all around the UK to get there. There's an environmental impact. Them breathing, there's an environmental impact, because they're breathing in oxygen and breathing out carbon dioxide. We all have, every single action and movement is creating change. Even when we die, we give off carbon because we're decomposing, or we burn ourselves, which releases it. You can't get away from it even after you're dead, basically. Okay.
That's happy.
So it's like the art of life for me isn't about the black and white. It's about which end of the greyness are you at. are you just doing something completely superfluous, which basically is just about titillation, and it, whether it's a small environmental impact or a big environmental impact, that's that's not going to make so there's no environmental justification for that. There might be other justification. That the titillation might be fun, it might be playful, it might give people joy, it might etc etc. But if you're kind of more at your end of the scale, that it's part of it's not going to change any individual on its own, but it's about reminding them that maybe they engaged with the rebellion and they saw some of that stuff and they come to your exhibition and you've given you kind of like trying to highlight the sustainable aspects of what you're trying to say. There's some message in there, and you can then actually then they go away with. So for me, art at its best is about asking questions and creating an emotional reaction, which is, as I say, I think the clearest emotional reaction was when those police officers were crying, because it hit something deep inside of them, so it's that. And then the other side is obviously I think part of it is actually honestly sharing that I feel conscious of this, number one. Number two, I've looked at reducing my impact as much as possible. I try and recycle stuff, I try and reuse as much as possible, etc. And I'm on a journey here, and so but one of the things is what people don't want to hear is that you're perfect. They do want to hear that you're on a journey. So I think if you can share that journey with them, and that and that part of that journey is that you're trying to engage them emotionally with what's happening, that I think then kind of works. So does that make sort of sense?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I'm definitely not perfect, so there we go. I've got another question. If people haven't, has anyone else got a question? If not, I've got more.
I was kind of interested in why you decided to not be with the rebellion anymore, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. So two main reasons. One, because I got to the working at the centre of Extinction Rebellion, there's a lot of crazy energy there, like really crazy, and some of it's not good crazy energy, I in a sense, effectively, because it's rebellion, there's quite a teenage energy in XR. Even some of the founders who are in their 50s are effectively teenagers in their energy, and so it was literally like dealing with transgressive, rebellious teenagers who they just had loads of success. Like their band had just got a #1, and they were like, "Yeah, let's go out there and let's do more." And I'm like, "What? You want to shut down Heathrow Airport with drones? That's a really dumb idea." Or you want to go and dance on tube trains? That's a really dumb idea. And so I would try and rationalise and work with those teenagers, those 53-year-old teenagers, and which I did. So I managed to stop. But it was part of a kind of like a little team who stopped there was a plan on the second day of the April Rebellion to shut down 30 tube lines, which would have been disastrous for that April Rebellion. We would have, all this stuff that I'm talking about you now would have never. I would not be talking to you now if that would have happened, because it would have killed the rebellion immediately. And so those teenagers, they did basically, because teenagers, they're testing their boundaries. They're trying to understand where their boundaries are. So they rebel. They try and push.
Oh yeah, I've got teenagers. Yeah.
And the thing is that, but these were like 50. This was a 53-year-old teenager who didn't have any boundaries basically, so didn't know where to stop. So I was, if I'm being slightly, if I'm not being very Hugh Grant about this, I was being the adult in the room. I was not being very sort of humble here, but amongst other adults in the room. I wasn't obviously the only adult in the room. And then, as you might be aware, that 53-year-old teenager decided it was a cool thing to do to make some comments about the Holocaust in relation to climate change to a German newspaper, which is a really cool idea. Really cool idea, wasn't it? No. And so basically, a lot of these crazy things were happening, and I was kind of basically trying to handle these teenagers. And you'd think you've got them sat down, and you think you've got them at home doing their homework, and then you suddenly find out they're popping up and they're dancing on a tube train. Oh, for God's sake! And so that was actually both. There was two reasons why that was a problem. One, it actually affected my mental health because it was like. And I take responsibility. It wasn't their fault, but the way it interacted with me it's draining because I was just so having to kind of like work with that. So that's number one. And then the second thing is it was crippling the opportunity for XR to continue that amazing exponential growth, because that 53-year-old teenager was actually the most important strategist for the April Rebellion. But then he turned from being the most constructive thinker, creative thinker, to the worst thinker. But also because he was the leader of the band, and he had his like acolytes playing guitar behind him, they would just play along to his lead singing because they thought he was the coolest dude around and to just follow him wherever he went. So they were just coming up with these, and he just wouldn't back down, would not back down, and it was just nightmarish. So that's why, unfortunately, there's this concept called the Overton window, which is a fascinating concept. I'd recommend having a look at it, which is it's how social norms can change. So a brilliant example actually is so if we take actually just recently Black Lives Matter. A month ago, Black lives didn't matter as much as they do now. They now matter a lot more, to the level that if you'd have gone to a Premier League club a month ago and gone, yeah, you really need to do something about Black Lives Matter, because obviously it existed then, they'd have gone, yes, that's very important, but it's very difficult to get all these football clubs to agree to something, so we don't know whether we can do that. Sorry. Black lives do matter, though. I saw last week something I genuinely thought was a joke, and I was like, is this April Fool's? No, it's not. And I literally had to check it on another site. The English Football Premier League has mandated that every single football team replaces the player's name that's on the back of their shirt with Black Lives Matter for the remaining games. Now, that is a massive shift from like, oh, yes, Black Lives do matter, of course, to them being willing to take that space on the back of their shirt, which is prime space. They're literally promoting their players, their capital through that. And that shift is incredible. But you can also look at other shifts which related to this slavery. Back in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and 20th century, even in America, slavery was still allowed. And in Britain, we banned it in the 18th century. Or was it 19th? Anyway, 200 years ago. And but now, it was not only okay to have a slave. In fact, it was kind of supported to have a slave. It was just the dumb thing for a nice middle-class person would have a slave. Whereas now, not only is it illegal, but you'd be a social and professional pariah if you were found to never mind have a slave, just be involved in some form of slavery at some point in some way. It was just unthinkable. So that's shifted from being it's unthinkable to not have slaves to being unthinkable to be associated in any shape or form with slaves. And another example was that with LGBT. In 1992, gay sex was still illegal in the Republic of Ireland. And so it would have been unthinkable to have equal rights for gay people. By 2015, you had gay marriage being legalised in the Republic of Ireland. So basically just over 20 years. And then by 2017, you get an out gay prime minister being elected who lives openly with his partner. And it's like, wow, Extinction Rebellion created not as big a shift as obviously some of those, but like a massive shift. Along with mainly Greta and the school strikers, there was just this kind of moment where we went from being, ooh, don't talk about the climate emergency, ooh, no, ecological breakdown, that's a bit too much, to being kind of like, bam, there's this shift. And that's why I joined, because I predicted that it had the opportunity to create that shift. And it did. But the problem was that what happened is that it's called the Overton window, is the kind of technical term, is that that shift did happen, which is brilliant. And then to be able to continue that shift from words to action, which is what we need now, it needed to keep on going. And unfortunately, because of all the crazy teenage stupidity, effectively, there's still lots of good things happening, but it's like the impact has plateaued.
So you're going to carry that on with the Hive thing then?
Sorry?
With your Hive project, your Hive Mind project, are you going to continue building on that then? In that respect, you think?
Yeah, so the hive mind for me is going to be building on actually my current interest is like, how do we create a wave of climate activism in the professions?
Yeah.
So my first, actually, due to some serendipity, is like I'm working on the legal sector. We get lawyers, not just kind of like using recycled paper, but also recognizing that they are currently, some of them, facilitating climate destruction. Just like, people are making money out of selling stocks and shares in the stock exchange. They were making money out of climate destruction, so are lawyers. And so, but they don't have that narrative currently. It's just they're doing their job. So I want to change that narrative. Now, that's not going to involve me, either myself or anybody, gluing themselves onto like a big law firm. But there is some other tactics that we've got, and then a strategy. Literally, I just finished writing the strategy today, and then sent it off to the founder of this organisation, which is kind of like a subset of my hive mind idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
You kind of answered this to a certain extent, but I wondered if you thought that Extinction Rebellion kind of had its moment, or whether it's still got some life in it.
So there is still life in Extinction Rebellion, but my opinion is that the best it can expect is to be a good activist organisation. But it was effectively, I would say that the April Rebellion was certainly the best British and potentially the best global guerrilla marketing campaign ever. Like, full stop. No business, Apple, nobody has ever done guerrilla marketing like Extinction Rebellion did. It was astonishing. Well, certainly not in Britain, and I don't think anywhere else, because it wasn't a true rebellion in the sense of rebellion, because rebellion's about bringing down the government. That's what some of the teenagers want to do. They genuinely want to bring down the government, which is, considering there's a technical term, what shit show is currently happening with the government, is not necessarily a bad idea. But there are consequences to bringing the government down, which means it's kind of like, there's a vacuum, and then sometimes the wrong people step into that vacuum. But in terms of being an amazing guerrilla marketing campaign, which what it did is it gave permission to people like me, but then also lots and lots of other people. That image, part of the reason why I show the image of the pink boat surrounded by the police is because I've seen that image, not just in Extinction Rebellion presentations, but I remember one time I was at a big conference it was an energy industry conference. And there was lots of people there who were big business. But there was one of the speakers was somebody who works for basically a government agency. And that person used that exact image of the pink boat to demonstrate that things have changed. Now, there's two things that are amazing there. Number one, she felt able to say climate emergency, ecological breakdown. But number two, she felt that it was okay as a government paid employee to use an image of like thousands of people breaking the law. Now that's an art. To be able to do that, that's art. To be able to create that energy so that you kind of replicate that. So that this person, and she's like, you know, probably very good at her job, but my sense was relatively conservative with a small c on a grand scale of things. She's not the sort of person that will be, you know, at the front of the queue to get arrested, by no means. But she used that at this conference publicly. Now, so the thing is that I think XR, they're still doing stuff. So I was just actually talking to a friend of mine who helped me design this. So I'll put a shout out. Thank you, Andrew, for the help, because he gave me that. Because I'll be recording of this. Maybe you'll listen to it. I should have said that earlier, actually. But what he's telling me about actually the kind of shenanigans that's going on with the teenagers and some of the plans that they've got, they're good, but my sense is that the only way that XR is going to have the same sort of have another big impact is if it works out how to get an exponentially larger number of people on the streets being creative but in a different way. So it's like we had what was amazing, literally astonishing, was the first April Rebellion, by my calculations, had a maximum of 3,000 people, and maybe as little as 2,000 people, either as the proactive organisers or getting arrested. Like no more than 3,000. And the impact, like all volunteers, the impact that had was obviously astonishing. But if we came back to London, which is what I wanted, my ambition for October was to have been, but we unfortunately didn't get our arse into gear, partially because of the teenagers, as that was to have had 30,000 come back to London. Because then if in October would have turned up with 30,000, the media would have been, wow, the story wouldn't have been about scruffy rebels. It would have been like, oh my God, they've not just taken over a small junction, they've taken over a whole area of the city. But the thing is that unfortunately with anything like an organisation, because I'm interested in organisational culture and things like that, is that I think it created this amazing virtuous cycle of energy starting off with the probably, as I say, August 2018, and then built this exponential growth of energy through the Declaration of Rebellion, the 5 bridges, that the Our Future thing, when we went, when I carried it on my shoulder, through to the Blood of Our Children, through to the April Rebellion, like woof. But the problem is to keep that energy is just so difficult, and that, unfortunately, part of what created that energy was that teenage transgressive, like, we don't give a fuck about this, we're just going to go out there and be rebel. And then due to kind of some amazing judgment through the artists, through some of the strategy, and some amazing luck as well. Because in terms of luck, it was literally a holiday from Brexit, because it was like basically bank holiday. So literally the government went, right, we're not going to do anything about Brexit. So the media wanted something to talk about. Bingo, here you go. Then also, it didn't rain once. And in fact, it was really good weather, if you remember it, last April.
Insane. It's too hot.
And then the final thing, which was even crazier, was the cops. The cops did a really bad job. We suckered them. Because what we did, it's partly my job. My job was literally to groom the cops into kind of going, oh, these are nice guys, they're not a problem. And we just suckered them in. And they just let us, literally, I could not believe it. When I was on the team for Parliament Square, so we'd done all our planning. We knew that we'd have some trucks coming in with like a bit of gear and things like that. It wasn't a massive amount of gear compared to some of the other sites. We didn't have, like a pink boat or anything. Um, and I remember turning up at 7 a.m. on that Monday, the 15th morning, and I'm cycling, Big Ben's on my left-hand side, and I'm cycling, and I'm looking into Parliament Square, and I'm like, there's not much there. And then cycling across to where we met at the Gandhi statue, like really amazing kind of like serendipity. And looking around, and literally, we told the police that we were starting in Parliament Square at 11 a.m. We told them exactly what we were going to be doing. The only uniform in that square was a park ranger. There wasn't a cop to be seen. So basically, we just started building stuff, and the cops then turned up. They had their donuts, watching us. All right, you're doing some stuff, and then basically we just went, right, we're just going to go into the road, and they were like, oh, okay, go into the road, and they didn't stop us. But then what happened is, like, I can be pretty certain, just as a final story on this, it's like, if you remember the kind of the thick of it type sort of scenario, right, where basically just imagine there's like somewhere in like, I don't know, Downing Street or the Met at New Scotland Yard, and there's this meeting, and there's like maybe the Home Secretary and there's a few others, and they're like, and then there's the guy who's responsible or the woman who's responsible for the main policing of this, and particularly the Oxford Circus. And so there's this kind of like, maybe the Home Secretary going, so you're telling me that you were the main police officer for the Oxford Circus? Yes, Home Secretary. And you're telling me that you knew that they were going to be taking Oxford Circus? Yes, Home Secretary. And you'd seen that there was a pink boat being driven in towards Oxford Circus? Yes, Home Secretary. And you saw it driving up to Oxford Circus Junction? Yes, Home Secretary. And you saw them park it there? Yes. And you let them leave it there and lock it up? Yes, Home Secretary. You get that fucking pink boat out of there, or I'm sending you on that fucking pink boat up to the fucking Shetland Islands, and that's where you're going to be spending your time as a fucking constable. Get it? And I can just imagine this scene, because what happened is that one of the things that was really interesting in the first kind of like few days of the rebellion was, even though obviously the cops had the force of law on their side, they could come along, pick us up and take us off. There was a clear thing, and you could see it in their eyes. They didn't have the commitment. They were just like, I'm just doing a job, and we kind of know you guys are probably right. And we had the commitment. We were so committed. And then there was this,
escalated though, didn't it? Towards the end.
It did, because this is the thing, is that I think on about that conversation that I've just described, I think probably happened on about day 3, when they knew that they'd been gamed. We'd got them, right? And they knew we weren't going, because they were coming up to us. And I remember on that Monday that it started, I remember cycling across Waterloo Bridge, and I'd seen cops at both ends, and cycling away and going, right, Waterloo Bridge will be cleared by tomorrow morning. I woke up, still there. Next day, still there. Next day, still there. And the thing was because we were committed, because we got the tactics of how to stay, and because we were getting all the news, because we were staying and doing the artistry, they were like, what the fuck? Get those fuckers out of here. Because the Home Secretary hadn't been interested in what we were doing until basically it started getting all the news, and they were embarrassed by it. And then you could see it in the eyes of the cops. They started getting serious. But what was interesting, initially, they got serious, but they didn't know how to deal with us, because like what we did is we introduced some kind of old traditional tactics, like what's called lock-ons. So you had these like literally concrete tubes, and what would happen is you come along with this concrete tube, 2 rebels would slip their hands in, they'd hold on to each other, and then sit there. And the cops can't take away 2 people at the same time. Like in France, they just come along, knock you on the head, and chuck you in a wagon. But, they're very polite here, and you can't do that. So basically, and we'd kind of glue on the. I remember going into Sainsbury's and buying glue, and then kind of secreting it to people. But the glue, they could get you off fairly quickly. But these lock-ons, they had to you had to call in a guy, and you had to get like an angle grinder, and he was all fairly safe and everything. But that took time, and he was like, I remember watching Zulu as a kid with my dad, and he was like this thing where they're coming at you, you think you're going to lose, and like, because there's loads of them, and they've got all the power, and then there's like a few of you, and then they disappear, and it's like, how that happened. And this is one of the amazing things, like, again, the artistry. It's like we broke their will at times. There was this moment where I was doing the Parliament Square, and I had actually been up at head office in a planning meeting with some of the teenagers, and then I got, as I was actually a bit late for my shift, and I was cycling down there fast, and then I got a buzz in my phone, and it was like pocket, and it was like, Adam, the police, they've turned up in numbers at Parliament Square, you need to be there. And I was like, oh crap. So I was like, faster. And I turned up to Parliament Square on my bike, and it was like something out of like Starship Troopers. Like there was loads of these cops swarming all over, like, because there was like about 4 corners that we'd taken of Parliament Square. And there was more cops than there were rebels around the particular areas. And I was like, oh no, we're going to get lost. It's not going to happen. And then there was like this moment, right, for about 10 minutes I was there, and I was like, right, that's it, it's going to go. And they started to clear one of them, and then they were on the way to clearing another, and I knew that if they cleared the third, that the fourth would go. And then, in the background, I heard ding-a-ling-a-ling, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, and then there's this massive group of cyclists turned up. There's this kind of group of cyclists that do this kind of regular monthly thing, and they got together. And it was like literally the cavalry turned up. These cyclists came into Parliament Square and started riding round it. And it was just this energy, and all the rebels that were there were like, yeah! And then that finished, and then about 10 minutes later, you just heard this in the background. It got louder and louder and louder. It was the freaking samba band turned up. It was literally tribal. That's why, as I say, I gave this analogy of Zulu. I mean, it's not appropriate on other levels, but there was this energy. And it basically broke the cops' will, because like within an hour they're gone. And then there was this pivot though, when, you know, that picture that I showed you of all the cops around the pink boat. That's when they got serious. It's like, they are not going to let you get there. They were like, and that's why then when the October Rebellion came around, they were a lot more organised. They disrupted us before we could disrupt them. And that's why actually. We had the surprise in the first one, whereas the second one, this is the problem, is that we're going to have to be a lot, for Exile, to go back to your original question, Karen, is not only do we have the problem of the teenagers, and the problem that actually those teenagers have created this bad energy, like people like me have left. But then the third thing is that because the teenagers, they're, you know, when it comes down to it, teenagers can occasionally come up with some good ideas, but essentially most of the time they're thick. So the thing is that actually they keep on coming up with freaking thick ideas. You need some actually adults in the room to come up with some bloody creative good stuff, and it's possible. But if you've got a bunch of teenagers, like, they don't even need to be leading it; they could just be disrupting it and stopping it happening. So it's possible, but very, very unlikely.
Tricky second album, isn't it? When you have, you know, amazing response to the first thing, what do you do then that can possibly top it, or even come close sometimes?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it didn't even come close. It was, and it wasn't.
It's nice to be out and about, wasn't it? I think the fact that it was such amazing weather in that first one was kind of very timely, because it was so weirdly hot. It was the start of that really kind of slightly post-apocalyptic summer where everything died, and, you know, it was hot but it also meant that it was actually nice to be outside the whole time, and people were willing to go and support and kind of be out, you know, people who slept outside for 10 days on the bridge. It wasn't like it was in October where it rained the entire time, and I think that has quite, but it also had, when the police were taking the shade away from people, it also had that element of that was one way that they could start to be a bit more disruptive back, because instead of instead of leaving the shade whilst they unglued people from the floor, they took the shade away immediately, and then 3 hours later they still hadn't syringed off people's glue, which was quite shocking to witness, really. No.
So you had some questions, Susie.
Oh, I was just going to ask about obviously, how do we keep sustainability on the agenda when other things come in, which how do I say this? Which might at the time seem more important, but sustainability obviously is still, so like the issues with Brexit and also the issues with currently with COVID, like obviously I'm not judging anyone if they decide they want to use disposable gloves or disposable masks, especially not in the medical setting. But when that now, so I've seen recently a lot of things I've been reading about the amount of plastic waste that's now going into the sea as a result of COVID, and like how do we balance these different things, or what? And also, like, I think there's another thing of I try to recycle, I try to minimize my single-use plastic, but I've never knowingly put a piece of plastic in the sea. Yeah. But it gets there, and it can't just get there from people dumping it. It's got this that's a part of it, obviously, but it's also getting there in other ways. So how do we basically balance sustainability with all these other things that are going to increasingly like, I don't think this I hope this virus is a one-off, but unfortunately the fact that we're invading on the climate more and more, invading on like the environment more and more, is probably going to mean that the likelihood of another virus like this is more is more likely. So it seems like how do we keep it at the agenda? And then
so one thing, just to clear up something, unfortunately, most of the stuff that gets into the ocean actually comes from countries which don't have well-structured waste things. So unfortunately, it is unfortunate, but it's like most of the waste in the ocean comes from the global south, because they don't have waste collection. So even in countries like that have, like, say, Poland, which doesn't have very good recycling rates, they still collect all their waste, and they might incinerate it, or they might stick it in the ground or whatever, but they do something with it. So the only waste that you will potentially end in the ocean is if people just are littering, and then that gets blown into an inland waterway, and then through the inland waterway goes out into the ocean. But whilst that's bad, that's a tiny fraction of what's actually going into the ocean. Apart from your clothes. If you've got artificial fibred clothes, that's creating microfibers, and that will definitively, all of that goes in the ocean. So one of the things, I'll actually just go and get something, so I'll be back in a very short second.
So what's the chat? Plastic Nile was on last week, really eye-opening on plastic pollution from Ethiopia. Sounds good. Where was that on? Was that BBC?
So
it's just gone.
Can you see that is what's it say? Stop micro waste. And these aren't kind of big trunks. I just realised it looked like a Tommy Hilfiger pants. They are. I'll just put some light on myself as well. Is that this is a bag which basically you put? I've got like some. This is like a polyester type t-shirty type thing, which I wear for my at night time. And this bag, you zip it up, and it basically what it does, the water and everything get in. It still washes your clothes. Zip it up, and then the waste collects in the bag, and then you empty the bag out into your normal waste, and then that gets disposed of in a normal way. So it doesn't go into the ocean. Because one of the things is, like, I've been thinking about sustainability for like a long time, and I've been actually working with sustainability for 15 years. I only got that this year. Even though I knew about microfiber waste, I didn't kind of like do anything about it.
I didn't know those existed. I'm just looking them up now. It sounds
I have heard those actually, but now I'll have to do something about them.
Now, the interesting is obviously what we need though is we need a conversation about the so that's actually the detail issue, but the bigger conversation is like, how do we create it in society so that either people just automatically do that because they just know. So it's a bit like, this is your poop bag for your dog, but rather than being for your dog, it's for your polyester t-shirt or your viscose trousers or whatever it is, right? For your artificial fibre trousers, which aren't gonna think. So it's your poop bag. Now, the interesting thing is obviously a big behavioural change was, I remember, back in the day, if you went onto a public park, you'd have a good chance to get some poop in your shoe. Whereas now, virtually never do you see any poop, and I literally, I can remember once in the last 5 years getting poop in my shoe. Whereas it used to be every time you went out, you get poop in your shoe pretty much. And that's because, now the thing is, you go to other countries, they don't have the same culture as we do. Like apparently Italy, they don't have that at all. Still the same as us. Still the same as we were like 30, 40 years ago. So that's been a shift. So the thing is, it's so to answer your question, it's how do we create some shifts in the right places? So do we focus it on the individuals, like the poop bag or the clothing bag? Do we focus it on the manufacturers of the well, it won't be the manufacturer of the dog because the dog's got to poop, but the manufacturer of the washing machine, so that the washing machine has a filter in it, so that automatically captures it, and then you just take that filter out and put it in the bin, right? Or do you make it so that the people who are making the polyester thing work out how that they don't create microfiber waste, which is literally killing animals. And actually, what I'm interested in is because this is a systemic problem. It's not and one of the problems and I was a bit part of this when I first started working this is there's been too much focus on it being about the individual, and the individual does need to take action. But why I was so passionate about Extinction Rebellion and passionate about creating the Hive Mind project is because it's about looking at, we've got to change the system. We've got to change the politics, the economics. We've got to change the culture, the society, the art, the way we do everything. But that's not about telling individuals, because then individuals, it's too difficult. You've got too many things to try and work out. So how do we get it so that, to answer your direct question, is for me, it's like, we've got to be working very emotionally intelligently. And using understanding of how things can change, because basically everything in society pretty much is a story. So it's like, money. We think money is a thing that's like it's and religion. So it's this might be offending some people, but for me, it's like it's a made-up story. People believe that God is a thing. No, it's actually a creation of man. Now, you might go that there is some great all-pervasive spirit in the universe. Yeah, okay, I get that. But there's not some dude sitting on a cloud with a big long beard, right? It's like, these are all stories. But the thing is so what I'm really interested in is, how do we create the right stories to fit? So just as Black Lives Matter create a story to mean that the Premier League have decided that they're going to invest their valuable kind of advertising space on the back of their shirts with that logo. When that's still during the pandemic. But it was, Black Lives Matter went from something that don't bother talking about it because this is, it's the pandemic matters, to Black Lives Matter became more important for a period than effectively the pandemic, and then it's like, for me, that's why I kind of get excited about this, because it's a really deep emotional challenge, because Black Lives Matter is people who are living now who are being affected by it. The pandemic people who are living now are dying or suffering due to it. Whereas climate change, people are dying and suffering from it, but it's not clear who it is. They're definitely not in Britain or virtually any of the other developed countries. And also, even if it does affect us, probably not going to affect many people for quite a long time. And so the biggest challenge is that it's like humans are designed to deal with things such as the pandemic. The reason why we've reacted so quickly to the pandemic is because all of us on this call, we could catch the bug, and all of us could potentially die, and all of us could definitely pass it on to our nearest and dearest, and that might kill them. And so now, give the governments of the world their due. To greater or lesser extents, they did a very good job of basically going, right, you need to take responsibility for this. And whilst the current administration didn't necessarily do a good job at the start of the pandemic, and from the mid-level onwards didn't necessarily do a good job, there was a short period where they did some good communication around how yeah, exactly. It was a small period, but it was a period where the communication, because what they did is they basically, in an I think basically appropriate way, is they sensed what the cultural norms of our society were, of British society, and unlike the French, the Spanish, and Italians, who went on a very strict legal lockdown, where at the most extreme in France, you were, and I think it was Italy and Spain the same, if you were found more than 100 meters from your house, you would be fined because you weren't even allowed out to exercise for a period. Now, we never got that far because we didn't need to, because actually there was some good narrative languaging about how you deal with things, and people took that on board. Now, as I say, it was a bit of a shit show before and after, but there you go.
Well, what was the good narrative language, just out of interest? What bit?
So it was the original triplicate. What was the original triplicate? Like the save lives.
Save the NHS.
Yeah, save the NHS, save lives. Yeah.
So what was the first?
Stay at home.
Stay at home.
Stay at home.
Save lives.
Save lives.
Protect the NHS. Yeah.
NHS.
And it was really clear. It was like 6 words. It was like XR. It had its 7 words. It was like clear. It was precise. But the key thing was actually what they'd intuited, and actually the evidence has been proven that it's correct, is that people were motivated to stay at home, not to protect themselves mainly. They were motivated mainly to protect other people, and also through that, and that's the say. So stay at home. So okay, I get that. Save lives. So what people were, they recognised that they do it for others. They'd be much more likely to do it for others. And then also because the NHS is kind of like a semi-religion in the UK, and the protect the NHS. The interesting thing is it's completely counterintuitive. The NHS is there to protect us. It's not my job to protect the NHS, but actually everybody, basically the government went, here's a pill which is protect the NHS, when in fact the NHS is meant to be protecting us. And then basically everybody went, I'll swallow that pill, I'll protect the NHS.
Turn into a charity.
The crazy thing is like actually I think once they've crunched all the numbers and gone into all the cases, quite a lot of the people that will have died over this year, quite a lot of them might have died because they protected the NHS by not going into hospital, because they didn't have a COVID-related problem. They had another problem, and they chose to protect the NHS by not going into hospital, and they've actually caused more problems, which might mean they die.
That's my cousin, actually, my cousin's husband.
Oh no, yeah. So,
He got a UTI, which is really serious in men, as you're probably aware. Had a heart attack.
No, exactly.
Yeah, died.
So exactly. So, but the thing is what I'm not. it showed that that was a very clever, and it wasn't, it wasn't Boris Johnson. It definitely wasn't Dominic Cummings coming up with that. It would have been a group of civil servants, like brand specialists, and like the kind of that some of the advisors, that behavioural nudge unit, kind of came together, came up with it, and then they nailed it. So the thing is that what it is for me is that and then also the government did, its daily briefings and things like that. It kind of did a good enough job of continuing that communication. Wasn't necessarily brilliant, but they did it well enough. So the thing is like, for me, what's interesting is like, how do we now kind of understand human psychology, understand what creates change, understand what stops change, and then use that? Because that's one of the things, the reason why I was interested in doing this conversation in part was because it helps me connect with what was so brilliant about XR, and then think about, we can't replicate that directly, but what are the lessons we can learn from that about what it did? And I'm now applying some of the no glue involved, but some of the lessons that we learned to things. So it's just kind of trying to create surprise, doing things unexpectedly, creating something which, not that it won't be artistic in the same way, but there'll be something about that. It's about asking questions, giving permission, guerrilla marketing, etc., etc.
Cool. I think that might be a good time to stop. My computer sounds like it's about to explode, having processed recording for 2 hours. Unless there's any other questions, I feel like it's very, very positive and proactive point to end on. But
yeah, sounds great.
So if we can say thank you to Adam and give him a big round of applause. Bye.
Recording has stopped.